The marketplace was alive with noise and light. Voices rose high, laughter echoed, and the smell of smoke mixed with strange spices in the air. Stalls lined the wide stone streets, each shouting for attention. Some sold shining weapons, others displayed exotic foods, and some darker corners carried cages with living beings inside. At the very center, under the biggest lanterns, a small wooden stage stood. On it, a tiny alien girl was pushed forward by two guards. Her wrists were bound with iron, and a heavy collar hung around her neck. She looked smaller than a child compared to the others of her kind. Her body was thin, her skin pale, and her wide eyes showed both fear and exhaustion. The auctioneer raised his voice. "Next for sale, a weak one, but she still breathes." His words were met with cruel laughter from the crowd. They leaned in closer, curious not because of value, but because they wanted to mock. "She is too small," one shouted. "She cannot work in the fields," another added. "Even as a servant, she would break." The girl lowered her head, her long hair covering her trembling face. She had been through this humiliation before. She knew what came next. No one would bid. No one ever did. The auctioneer tried again. "Come now, she may not be strong, but she can still serve." His voice carried false cheer, but the merchants below only smirked. "Worthless," one spat. "Not even fit for scraps," another jeered. Their words cut sharper than knives. The tiny girl's shoulders shook. Her lips moved as if she whispered something only she could hear, perhaps a prayer to be unseen. In the shadows, a human traveler stood. His cloak was dusty from the road, his face partly hidden under the hood. Unlike the others, he did not laugh. He did not mock. He watched silently. His eyes stayed fixed on the girl, studying her carefully. He saw not weakness, but something else. Something the others ignored. The auctioneer grew impatient, his voice sharp now. "No bids, not even a single coin." He slammed the wooden board with his hand. The crowd laughed louder, some even tossing pebbles at the stage. The girl flinched, curling in on herself, trying to become smaller. "Not worth the rope that holds her," someone shouted. Another voice mocked. "Even if she were free, she would still be nothing." Laughter filled the air like a cruel storm. The girl bit her lip to keep from crying, but a single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. The human's hands clenched under his cloak, his jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty before, but the sight before him struck a chord deep inside. She was small, broken, and humiliated, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she endured the scorn. Something inside him whispered that this was wrong, deeply wrong. The auctioneer raised his hand to push her back, muttering that she was a waste of time. The crowd prepared to move on to the next sale, the laughter dying into bored murmurs. That was the moment the human stepped forward. His voice was calm, clear, and strong, cutting through the noise of the marketplace like steel. "I'll take her," he said. The crowd froze. Laughter stopped mid-breath. Heads turned in disbelief. For a heartbeat, the marketplace became silent. Then voices rose again, louder, harsher. "What did he say?" "The human wants her?" "Impossible!" They shouted in shock and mockery. The girl's eyes widened. She looked up, confused. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time, someone had spoken for her. Not against her, not to mock, but to claim. The auctioneer blinked in surprise, then smirked. "You?" He sneered. "Why would you waste your coin on this one? She has no strength, no skill, no future." The human did not answer yet. His eyes stayed on the girl, steady and unshaken. And the crowd grew restless, hungry for drama. They could not believe a human would dare to claim the most worthless being in the market. The girl's heart pounded in her chest. Was this real or just another cruel joke? Was he saving her or only making the laughter worse? As the guards hesitated, the human stepped closer to the stage. His boots echoed against the stones. His presence carried weight, and though no one understood why, the laughter grew uneasy. The tiny girl lifted her head slowly, her tear-streaked face meeting his eyes, and in that gaze, she saw something she had never seen before. Recognition. The air felt heavier now, as if the entire marketplace had paused to witness the strange moment. A human had spoken, calmly, clearly, and offered to take the girl no one wanted. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow, then laughed. "You want her?" he asked loudly. "You can barely call her alive." His voice echoed, followed by cruel chuckles from the crowd. "She's broken," someone shouted. "Maybe he wants a pet, not a helper," another called out. The laughter grew louder, meaner, filling the space with mockery. The tiny alien girl stood frozen on the platform, her hands still bound. Her legs trembled, not from fear this time, but from confusion. She dared to look at the human again. His face was calm, still hidden partly by the hood, but his eyes were clear. He wasn't joking, he wasn't mocking her, he meant it. The auctioneer walked to the edge of the platform and leaned forward. "Let me guess," he said. "You're feeling pity, right? You humans always fall for the sad ones." He smirked, then turned to the crowd. "Maybe he thinks he can save her." More laughter followed. One merchant even threw a coin at the stage and shouted, "Here, take her for free, that's all she's worth." The human stepped forward. His voice didn't rise, but every word cut through the noise. "I will pay what she is worth to me," he said, and placed a small pouch on the auctioneer's table. The sound of metal coins clinking was loud. The crowd grew quiet again. A few leaned forward, eyes rowing in disbelief. The pouch was full, more than what was usually paid for healthy, trained workers. "Are you mad?" the auctioneer asked, suddenly serious. "This much for her?" The human didn't answer the question. He turned toward the girl instead. He reached into his coat and pulled out a simple cloth, walking up the steps to the platform. The guards moved to block him, but the auctioneer raised a hand. "Let him," he said with curiosity. The girl flinched as the human approached. She expected to be hit or mocked again, but instead, he gently laid the cloth over her shoulders, covering her torn clothes. She looked up at him, her lips trembling, still unable to speak. He reached for the chains at her wrists. The crowd murmured in confusion. What is he doing? He's removing the chains? With a small tool from his belt, the human unlocked the cuffs. The metal fell to the floor with a loud clang. Her hands were free for the first time in weeks. The tiny girl held her wrists, staring at the red marks. She didn't move, didn't run, didn't cry. She just stood there, shocked. "Why?" she whispered, too soft for most to hear. The human leaned closer and spoke only to her. "Because you don't belong in chains." Gasps spread through the crowd. The auctioneer's mouth hung open. He had seen strange buyers before, but never this. Never someone freeing a purchase at the very moment of sale. The laughter stopped, replaced by whispers and confusion. Who is this human? Is he from a rich house? Does he want to start a fight with the law? But the human ignored them all. He gently helped the girl step down from the platform, holding her hand so she wouldn't fall. Her legs were weak, but she followed, still wrapped in the cloth. They walked together, past the crowd that once mocked her, past the guards, past the vendors. All eyes followed them, yet no one dared stop him. The girl looked up once more, trying to understand, trying to believe. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from something new, something warm. The crowd still buzzed with confusion as the human led the tiny alien girl away from the stage. Some stared in silence, others whispered like insects in the dark. The noise faded behind them, but the weight of many eyes still followed. The girl's steps were unsteady. Her thin legs shook with each movement, but she didn't fall. The human walked beside her slowly, giving her time. His hand stayed close, not gripping her, just offering support if she needed it. She kept glancing at him, afraid to speak. Her mind was filled with questions. Why had he freed her? Why had he paid for someone no one wanted? Was this real, or just another trap? They reached a quiet corner of the outer market, away from the noise. The human stopped near an old wooden bench and gestured for her to sit. She hesitated, then lowered herself carefully, like someone unsure if the ground would vanish beneath her. The human removed his cloak and folded it, placing it under her to keep her from the cold bench. The act was simple, but her eyes filled with shock again. No one had ever done such a thing for her, not even once. She looked at her wrists, the red marks from the cuffs still fresh. "Why did you pay for me?" she finally asked. Her voice was soft, barely more than a breath. The human looked at her, then reached into his pouch and pulled out a water flask. He handed it to her and said, "Because you're worth it." The words didn't make sense to her. She stared at the flask, then slowly took a sip. The cool water touched her dry throat, and tears rose in her eyes, not from pain but from kindness she didn't understand. "You saw them," she whispered. "They laughed. They said I was nothing." The human nodded. "They don't see what I see," he replied. "They only see weakness." The girl lowered her eyes. "But they're right," she said. "I can't lift heavy things. I can't fight. I'm not strong like the others." He paused, then said gently, "They measure strength with power. I measure it with courage." She looked up at him again, this time truly studying his face. There were small scars on his cheek and chin, signs of old battles. His eyes held no cruelty, only a quiet fire that made her feel warm. Back at the auction table, the auctioneer opened the pouch and gasped. Inside were not just common coins, but golden credits, rare and valuable. He gave this for her? He whispered. A full pouch of royal credits? The crowd exploded again with disbelief. Some merchants ran to follow the human, wanting to speak with him, wanting to understand. Others were angry, shouting that this broke tradition. Meanwhile, the girl wiped her face with the cloth he'd given her. She had always been told she was worthless. She had believed it, lived it, breathed it. But this human, he didn't just buy her. He treated her like she was something rare, something special. The human looked around as two alien guards approached him, their faces serious. You can't take her, one said. She's not allowed outside the trade zone. The human stood calmly. I paid, he said. She's mine now. She's not a citizen, the guard replied. She has no right to live free. The human's voice sharpened. Then she will have my name. The guards blinked in surprise. People nearby gasped, giving shocked cries. Giving a non-citizen your name meant giving them your protection, your rights. It was rare and dangerous. The girl stared at him, her lips parted. Why would you? Because, he said. No one else did. The human stepped forward, slow and calm, as the crowd parted in confusion. His boots tapped against the stone ground of the market. Eyes followed him. Whispers grew louder. No one understood what he was doing. The tiny alien girl stood frozen. Her arms were tied in thick ropes, her thin legs barely holding her up. Her head was low, ears drooping. She expected more pain. Maybe he would hit her. Maybe he just bought her to mock her like the others. Her body trembled, bracing for cruelty. But the human didn't strike her. Instead, he reached into his belt and pulled out a small tool. With careful hands, he moved closer and knelt beside her. His voice was quiet, calm. Hold still, he said. The girl flinched. Her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't move. She couldn't. With a soft click, he cut the rope on one wrist, then the other. The restraints dropped to the ground with a dull thud. The girl's hands were free, but they didn't move. The skin on her wrists was red and raw. She didn't even know how to react. The human looked at her for a moment. Then, without a word, he took off his own cloak. It was large, warm, and heavy with travel. Gently, he placed it over her small shoulders. It covered her almost completely. The fabric smelled like dust and firewood, but also something safe. You belong with me now, the human whispered. The girl's eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. No one had ever said such words to her before. Not with kindness, not with care. The marketplace went silent. Aliens of every kind froze where they stood. Some had their mouths open, mid-laugh. Others dropped their drinks or trade items. Even the auctioneer looked shocked, his voice stuck in his throat. A human? Claimed her? Someone muttered. He covered her, like family, said another. No one does that, a merchant hissed. Not for one like her. The human ignored them all. He stood slowly and turned to face the crowd. His eyes were not angry, not proud, just serious, solid, like stone. He didn't care for their rules. He didn't care for their laughter. All he cared about was the girl now standing behind him, still shaking, still unsure. The girl peeked out from under the cloak. Her heart beat fast. She expected someone to pull her away. She expected pain to return at any moment. But the human stayed in front of her, like a shield. One step, two steps. He began to walk, gently pushing the crowd aside as he made a path through them. The girl looked at the ground, then at his back, then at the crowd, still frozen, still watching. Her bare feet moved without thinking. She followed him, step after step, unsure, scared. But something inside her whispered, go. The merchants didn't speak. Some looked away, some stared in anger, but none stepped forward. Not yet. A breeze moved through the marketplace. It lifted the edge of the human's cloak. For a moment, it wrapped around the girl like a hug. Her raw wrists ached, her legs were weak, but for the first time in her life, her chains were gone, and someone had spoken words that felt like light in the darkness. You belong with me now. Words she didn't understand fully, but wanted to believe. The market was far behind them now, but the voices still echoed in her mind. Mocking laughter, cruel eyes, cold words, they haunted her steps like ghosts. She walked beside the human, her bare feet touching the stone roads carefully. Each step felt strange, not because she was tired, but because she was walking free. The collar still hung around her neck, heavy and cold, but her wrists were unchained. She kept touching them, again and again, just to make sure the bindings were truly gone. The human said nothing as they walked, But he didn't leave her behind. He moved at her pace, always a step beside her, never ahead, never too far. They stopped near an old, quiet building made of stone and glass. Inside was a small space with a fire pit, a low bed, and a simple table. It wasn't grand, but it was clean. It smelled of dust, smoke, and something warm. To the girl, it felt like a place that had never known chains. The human brought her inside and gently motioned toward the bed. She hesitated, confused. "I sleep here?" she asked softly. He nodded and replied, "You're not in a cage anymore." Her throat tightened, her chest felt strange, like it held a breath too big to let out. She sat down slowly. Her fingers gripped the blanket as if it might vanish. The human knelt in front of her and reached toward her neck. She flinched, but he paused. "I need to remove this," he said. She nodded, eyes wide, and he unlocked the metal collar. It fell with a dull thud to the floor. She stared at it, then at her own reflection in the polished glass nearby. No collar, no chains, only the cloth over her shoulders, and her own breath in her lungs. It didn't feel real. The human stepped away and began heating water near the fire pit. The girl watched him, still unsure what was expected. In the market, she had been told when to speak, when to move, when to bow. Now, no one told her anything. It was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. The human returned with a bowl of warm water and a cloth. He offered it to her. "For your face," he said gently. She hesitated, then dipped the cloth and wiped the dirt and tears from her cheeks. Her reflection in the glass changed piece by piece. After she finished, the human handed her a small piece of food. It was soft and warm, filled with flavor she had never tasted before. She ate slowly, her hands shaking. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He answered, "Because no one else did." She stared at him for a long moment, her heart thudding loudly. She didn't understand this kind of kindness, not yet. She had always known hunger, punishment, silence, but never warmth. It scared her, the way her heart hoped it could be real. Night fell slowly outside the stone building. The stars blinked into view, bright and clear through the high glass window. The girl sat on the bed, the blanket wrapped around her small form. The human lit a low lantern and placed it near her, its soft light warming the air. He moved to the other side of the room to rest, giving her space. But before he lay down, she whispered, "Do I still belong to you?" He turned toward her. "No," he said, "you don't belong to anyone." Her lip trembled, then she asked, "Then why did you save me?" He looked into her eyes and said quietly, "Because you deserve to be saved." The quiet house became her shelter, but not the world outside. Even though the chains were gone, even though the collar was off, she could feel the weight of eyes watching from shadows. The alien girl stayed close to the human, but fear still clung to her steps. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. No, he had proven that, but she feared what others would do to him because of her. In the town, whispers had begun to spread like wind through dry leaves. "She's still with him," said one voice. "A human bought her and walks beside her like she's his equal," said another. "She was nothing. Now he treats her like family," someone scoffed. "That's not normal." And the worst whisper came like poison. "He gave her his name, his protection, his house. What else will he give her next?" The girl heard them even when they pretended she couldn't. They spoke in side alleys, at stalls, behind her back, but their words found her ears. The same people who once laughed at her now seemed angry that she wasn't crying. They didn't hate her for being weak. They hated her for being chosen. One day, as she followed the human to the supply market, she felt the shift. People stepped away when they passed, as if the space around them had become toxic. Mothers pulled their children close, vendors closed their stalls early, guards stared without blinking. The human didn't react, didn't even look at them, but the girl noticed his jaw tighten. Inside the shop, the human bought food, bandages, and cloth. The old vendor tried to smile, but his hands shook as he packed the items. "You should leave her," he whispered under his breath. "She brings trouble, you know that." The human's reply was quiet but firm. "She's not the trouble." The girl looked up at him when they stepped outside. "You could live in peace without me," she said, her voice barely audible. He looked at her, eyes steady. "Peace without just ice is not peace." Back at the house, she sat by the window, watching the street. 2 guards passed by slowly, eyes scanning the building. They didn't knock, didn't speak, just walked by again and again, like wolves circling a campfire. The girl's hands clutched the blanket around her shoulders. She was no longer in chains, but it felt like the world wanted to put new ones on her, invisible ones. She whispered to herself, "They want him to regret me." That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat up and moved quietly toward the fire, where the human was sitting, reading an old tablet. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He looked at her, confused. "Regret what?" "Buying me," she said, "freeing me, giving me your name." He placed the tablet down, leaned forward and said, "I didn't buy you, I claimed you from darkness." She blinked. "But they say—" "I don't care what they say," he interrupted, his voice soft but clear. "I saw you. I chose you. Not because of what they saw, but because of what I did." Her heart swelled, her eyes watered, but she wiped them quickly. "They won't stop," she said. "They hate that I'm with you." "They can hate," he replied. "I'll still stand." She curled beside the fire, and for the first time, leaned her head gently against his arm. He didn't move, didn't push her away. His presence was steady. Outside, the whispers grew louder, but inside, something else grew stronger. Trust. The nights were getting colder, and the silence outside grew sharper. Inside the small house, the fire still burned, but a strange feeling settled in the air, like the calm before a storm. The girl sensed it in the way the human locked the doors twice, in the way he glanced out the window before sleeping. She didn't ask why, she already knew. They were being watched more openly now. Guards passed every few hours, strangers stood across the street too long. Even shopkeepers turned their faces away when the human entered. The town was no longer pretending. It didn't like what he had done, and it didn't want her to forget that. One afternoon, while the human went to speak with an old friend, she stayed behind to clean the room. She was folding the blanket on the bed when the door creaked. She turned, expecting to see him, but instead, 3 figures stepped inside. They were not guards, not merchants, just tall men in dark coats. Their faces were hidden by masks, but their voices were sharp and cold. "You don't belong here," one of them said. Another stepped closer. "He doesn't know what you are. He thinks you're harmless." She backed away, her hands trembling. "Please," she whispered, "leave him out of this." One of them grabbed her arm hard. "He won't be harmed if you disappear quietly." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't scream. She couldn't. She didn't want to bring him pain, not again, not because of her. The door slammed open before they could pull her away. The human stood there, his face calm, but his eyes like fire. He said nothing, just walked in slowly, step by step. The men turned, one pulling a weapon from his belt. "This is not your concern, human." The human didn't blink. "She's under my protection," he said. "She's a mistake," the masked man growled. "And you've shamed yourself by taking her in." "She is mine to protect," the human replied. "Not yet. Ours to harm." There was a beat of silence, then everything moved fast. The attacker lunged forward, swinging the weapon. The girl screamed, backing into the wall, but the human moved like he had done this before. He blocked the strike, pushed the first man back. The second tried to grab him but was slammed into the door frame. The third swung a metal pipe, grazing the human's arm, but he didn't stop. With calm strength, the human forced all 3 back toward the exit. "Go," he said, voice low and firm. "Now." The men hesitated, then fled, angry and silent, disappearing into the street. Blood dripped from the human's arm, but he turned to her. "You're safe," he said, kneeling beside her. Her body shook, not from fear now, but from something deeper. "You got hurt because of me," she whispered. He smiled gently, even through pain. "I told you I'd stand." She touched his sleeve with trembling fingers, trying to stop the bleeding. "You didn't have to fight," she said. "I did," he answered, "because you are not a mistake." Tears ran down her cheeks, but this time they were silent, not from sadness but from something that almost felt like hope. She whispered, "Why do you keep choosing me?" He looked into her eyes. "Because I don't choose what's easy. I choose what's right." She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his chest, and for the first time she whispered back, "Then I'll stand too." The house was quiet again, but something had changed. The fight had left scars on the walls and a scratch on the human's arm, but deeper than that, it had left something else behind. A bond, not forced, not bought, but slowly built. like the first fire in winter. The girl woke early, before the sun touched the windows. She walked softly across the room and stood beside the sleeping human. He had stayed in a chair all night, arm wrapped in cloth, chest rising slow and steady. She watched him for a while, wondering how someone could be strong without shouting. Later that morning, he handed her a new piece of cloth. It was stitched with care, dyed a soft blue, and wrapped in twine. She opened it slowly and gasped. Inside was a set of clothes. Not old, not torn, but new. For a moment she couldn't breathe. "For me?" she whispered. He nodded. "You deserve to be seen," he said. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. She took the bundle and stepped behind the curtain to change. When she came out, she looked different, not just clean, not just dressed, but real. The fabric hugged her gently, soft and warm. She looked at her reflection in the glass wall and touched her cheek. She didn't see a slave anymore, not a castaway. She saw someone still standing, still alive. He watched her with a quiet smile, then said, "I want to give you something more." She tilted her head, unsure. "More?" "A name," he said, "one that belongs to you, not the one they gave you in chains." She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never thought about names before, not real ones. She had been called things like it, scrap, worthless, and worse. Never once had someone asked what she wanted to be called. He sat down across from her. "Would you like that?" She stared at him, then slowly nodded. "Yes." He pulled out a small data chip and placed it on the table. It was a citizen's token, something that held the right to be counted. He pressed a few buttons and said, "From this day on, you will be called Aya." The sound was soft, simple, and light, like her. "Aya," she whispered, the name settling into her chest like a song she had always known. She looked up at him with wide eyes. "What does it mean?" "It means light after darkness," he said. "It means you." She stood slowly, repeating the name, Aya, again and again, and each time it left her lips, she felt a little stronger. She turned to him and said, "Thank you." He answered, "You don't have to thank me anymore, Aya. You just have to be you." Later that day, they walked through the market again. This time, people stared as before, but something was different. Aya didn't lower her head. She didn't hide behind his cloak. She walked beside him, head high, eyes calm, a name on her lips. A young alien child pointed at her and asked his mother, "Who is that?" The woman looked, then whispered, "That's the human's girl." Aya heard it, and for once, it didn't hurt. It didn't feel like shame. It felt like proof. She was someone now, and the world would have to learn her name. That night, under the stars, Aya sat beside the fire with him again. She whispered, "I never thought I could have a name, a place, a voice." "You have all three now," he replied, "and no one can take them from you." Aya was no longer invisible. She had a name now, and it echoed softly through the town, on lips both curious and bitter. Some whispered it with confusion, some with anger, and a few with quiet respect. But one thing was certain, the girl once mocked as worthless was no longer forgotten. Trouble came again, not in the form of masked men or cruel merchants. This time it came in letters, sealed with the mark of the city council. A notice was delivered to the human's door, bold and cold. He read it once, then placed it on the table in silence. Aya picked it up and tried to read the symbols. She was still learning the words, still learning the world. "What does it say?" she asked softly. He looked at her, voice calm but heavy. "They've summoned us." "To where?" she asked. "To the council hall," he replied. "They want answers. About you, about me, about why I gave you my name." The next day, they walked together under the watching sky. The council hall was built like a fortress, tall and cold. Inside, a dozen robed leaders sat behind stone desks, their eyes sharp and unforgiving. They looked down at the human and the girl who walked beside him with steady steps. An elder counselor spoke first, his voice loud and clear. "You brought an unregistered being into protected territory." Another added, "You gave her your name, your protection, your resources. Why?" The human stood tall, hands behind his back, and said, "Because no one else would." Aya stayed close to him, her heart pounding. One counselor leaned forward. "She is not your kin, not your kind. She was discarded for a reason." The human's eyes burned now. "She was discarded by people who saw weakness, not value." Another counselor spoke harshly. She was bought in the slave market. She cannot be trusted. Her presence dishonors our law. The human stepped forward. Then your law is blind. Gasps filled the room. The poor council shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't stop. Aya is not property. She is a living being, with a mind, with courage. She has more honor than those who put her in chains. Aya's hands trembled, but she lifted her head. She looked at the council, her voice soft but clear. I did not ask to be born small, she said. I did not ask to be thrown away. I only asked for one thing, to be seen. The room went still. Her words hung in the air like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Some looked away. Others stared at her in silence. One counselor finally said, even if we agree to her freedom, the people will not accept it. Then let them learn, the human replied, or let them stand in my way. There was a long pause. Then the head counselor sighed and said, we cannot undo your actions. We cannot strip your name from her, but if you defy us again, we will not protect you. The human nodded once. I never asked for protection. He turned to Aya and said, let's go. As they left the great hall, many eyes followed them, some with fury, some with doubt, but a few, just a few, with quiet admiration. Aya walked tall, no longer hiding behind him. She walked beside him, step for step, no longer the girl who cried in silence. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the path ahead. Aya looked up at the sky, then at the man who stood beside her through everything. She whispered, even when the powerful rise against us, you still choose me. He smiled and answered, especially then. The great hall was silent. Rows of aliens sat in high seats, their faces cold and sharp. At the center, under the glowing lights of the trial chamber, stood the human. Beside him, wrapped in his worn cloak, was the tiny alien girl. She held his hand tightly. Her body trembled, not from fear of punishment, but from fear he might let go. The judge, tall and armored in gold, slammed his staff down. Human, he said, voice deep and echoing, you were warned. That girl has no value, no family, and no right to be claimed. Return her to the state, walk away, and we will forget your insult. The crowd murmured, some nodding, some glaring. Many expected the human to surrender. He was alone, a stranger, surrounded by rules he didn't belong to. But he didn't move. He squeezed the girl's hand instead, and then slowly he stepped forward. I will not return her, he said calmly. Gasps filled the room. The judge narrowed his eyes. She is not yours to keep, a voice barked from the gallery. She is less than nothing, another spat. But the human raised his voice, not in anger, but with strength. She is mine, he said, not as a slave, not as property, but as my kin. He looked at the girl beside him. Her eyes were wide, shining like glass. She could barely breathe. She belongs with me, he continued, because I chose her, because I saw her when no one else did. I do not need your permission to treat someone with kindness. The hall turned cold. A wave of silence passed through every seat. The judge stood slowly. You break tradition, he said. Then your tradition is broken, the human answered. A soft noise came from the girl, barely a whisper. She looked up at him, her voice shaky. But why? She asked. Why me? The human knelt down. In front of everyone, he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. Because you were never worthless, he said. They just used to see it. I won't. The girl's lips trembled. She had no words, only tears. But these tears were not from pain. They were warm. In that moment, something inside her changed, something long buried. She no longer felt like nothing. She felt seen. A soft light glowed from her eyes, an old trait of her kind triggered by deep emotion. The crowd noticed, some gasped, others fell silent. The judge raised his hand again. You risk punishment, he warned. You risk exile. The human stood tall. So be it. Then he turned to leave, with the girl still beside him, her hand still in his. As he walked through the hall, no one stopped him. No guard raised a weapon. No noble gave orders. Because deep down, something had shifted. They had mocked her, laughed at her, called her broken and unworthy. But now she walked with pride, because one human refused to follow the galaxy's cold laws, because one heart had chosen her, and because sometimes one act of love is enough to rewrite everything.